Good evening. My name is Jasmine Williams. I am a 2L here at Tulane Law School. I'm joined today by Ty Thomas, a former graduate of Tulane, the class of 2001. Thank you so much for being with us, Ty, today.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
So I have been blessed with the opportunity to conduct Tulane Sports Law Diversity Spotlight for this year. And today I just want to get off the bat and Ty, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Proud graduate of the law school back in 2001. Was privileged to go through the sports law program in the late 90s, early 2000s. Native Philadelphian who actually practiced in New York initially, and now has made his practice down here in Washington, D.C., which is gloomy today, but I'm jealous of those in New Orleans. But it's been great. It's been a great ride because I've actually been able to represent, a lot of sports related clients. Literally right either even doing law school and then thereafter. So I've been privileged in that area.
Tell us a little bit your journey to Tulane down in New Orleans. How did you end up at Tulane Law School? What was your deciding factor, if you will?
So when I went to Tulane, I was researching. I remember I actually worked 4 years between undergrad. Went to Dartmouth for undergrad. And after 4 years in Dartmouth, I decided I was going to go to a law school in a warm weather environment. So I started doing research in different law schools. But at the time, and my recollection that it was that there were four principal law schools that had, what I would call credible sports programs, sports law programs, and Tulane was chief among them. So it stuck out to me that, I knew that I wanted to, go back to school. I knew I wanted to practice law, but I knew part of that was also being part of sports business and law at the same time. And when I evaluated Tulane, it kind of matched up for what I wanted to do.
So tell us a little bit about your current work experience. When you left Tulane, what was your welcome to the league moment, if you will, becoming a lawyer?
So actually, it's tied to Tulane. So when I was at Tulane, I never forget this. It's my third year. There was actually an advertisement, or I guess a posting for, and then basically to work as a law clerk during your law school year, and doing a collegiate sports investigation. It was actually an institution that had 5 sports infractions before the NCAA. And at that time, a lot of my classmates were into becoming an agent, or at least there was a high interest in becoming an agent, working for a pro team, working for a pro league. I kind of stuck out because I was open to college sports, and literally, based on what I've understood afterwards, I was the only person who applied for it, which made me by far the best applicant for the position. So ironically, the adjunct professor who I worked with in doing that case moved his practice from New Orleans to Washington. And that actually was at my immediately past predecessor firm where I was with for 17 years, where I started doing college sports investigations there. And it just kind of, it's one of those things where you're say availability is the best ability. And I made myself available to other, higher ed clients doing other work. So when they actually had sports work, I became kind of tied in with that. And, we were advising not just athletic directors, but the boards of trustees and the presidents on things from Title IX and high profile NCAA investigations, and then conference commissioner contracts. And, then it becomes your label as a sports guy. So that led to me working on pro teams. And, one of our clients bought the dominant, the majority ownership interest in the basketball and hockey team. So when they had some legal issues, and thanks to the background I had from Tulane, I was familiar with the NBA bylaws and things like that. It just makes you an invaluable asset that you can actually then provide, different type of skill sets for things that come up for your clients.
And so now that you've been experienced in the sports law practice and the law practice, from everything from writing contracts for presidents of universities to working with the, Golden State Warriors, what is a sliver of advice you would, hand out to a prospective law student or a current law student like myself?
I think you have to have flexibility. I mean, I don't want to be generic because everybody tells law students, or certainly young lawyers, that to be a good lawyer first, right? And in some ways, I wonder if we're really, kind of shortchanging the issue when we say that. I mean, that should be a baseline for any level of practice in any field. But I do think there's a level of flexibility, studying the business, and networking. Like those things are all going to be critical. That if you're flexible, maybe you're working on an assignment that in a law firm has a sports, kind of twist to it, but it's initially on a document production or due diligence aspect. So it's not as racy or, kind of sexy as some of the other things, but it gets you, before that, or maybe you're doing something that, is more background and oriented and kind of like delving in research issues. It doesn't have a front facing position, but, you have to be flexible about that. But networking is key. I've the business, especially for those going into private practice, for the law firm side, there's not coming, there's generally not somebody in your desk saying, "Hey, have all my sports work," right? There's going to be things that you're going to have to actually educate yourself on about the business of sports, about legal developments in sports. For me, it's about, what changes are happening. I'm an employment lawyer by trade, so what changes in that field and maybe with labor can I be of asset to? When it comes to publicity rights, I had some experience with that, so that actually evolved to how the things are involved in Title IX and the interchange between NIL deals and things like that now. And you have to, always be learning. You have to always be learning and be not ashamed to be your own self-promoter. Particularly, I have to say for diverse attorneys, you have to make sure that you're not scared to stand out, that you're not scared to have an opinion. Hopefully well-researched one, but that you're not able to, you're going to stand on your own 2 feet. You're going to say, look, I know that we've done this. I've not been involved in this, and I think I have the skill set that can be an asset here. And if not now, keep me in mind for the next one. That type of thing.
Prior to joining Holland and Knight, you were a partner and chair of your diversity board at your previous firm. How have your goals changed since taking up that position? And especially now in the day and age of, social awakening and people becoming more aware of the inequalities in today's society.
I'm very proud of the work I've done with DEI generally in my career, but particularly as you mentioned with my prior firm, I led our diversity efforts for 8 years, and I think it's actually intertwined in the business. I have to be honest, like in sports, we have a lot of people from different countries. Gender equity is big in sports, and I think really, it's to me, there's a marriage of the two, right? Like it was always important to me, particularly as I started getting my own clients, that I was very conscious of how I was staffing those members. That it was actually important to some of my clients themselves, because I would get the questions like who's doing what, right? That's a real thing. And then you look about social impact, obviously everybody talks about George Floyd, but I think that, some of these things have been cyclical. I've been around long enough that I've seen, calls to diversity for those who actually, practice and came out in the early 2000s. There was a call to diversity to law firms about doing things in hiring, particularly Black and brown attorneys back then. And then you look at how the numbers have not necessarily increased. So I think it is important for those of us who are in positions where you are opportunity givers, that you actually can give the training, that you can give the exposure, that your endorsement really means something. If it's someone who has, maybe they don't want to work in a law firm environment within compliance, consulting, and within sports and entertainment, to do that balancing act. Let's make sure we're saying names, call out the names that are not being heard in the room. And it's important for us to really, I think it's, if you have the privilege of doing that, that goes to other things. And, law firms have, in the legal industry, it's not just law firms have always struggled. I'm very proud of the fact that I've joined a firm that's, that really gets that, and that I was able to work in other areas where that was gotten. And hopefully that becomes a spread thing. Like it can't be a fad of the month. If you're actually talking about diversity as in a day, hey, now see this happen, well, our firm has this diversity or our company has a diversity effort. They do this. It's a week. Yeah. I don't know what your background is. It's a week. So straight white males, no disability status. That's a week. Like we're all involved in that. That's something that has to be a brand for everybody. So, but I've been really pleased the fact that I can actually bring that, and actually in some aspects use some of the advice, because I actually have done some advice with companies and entities, both in sports and not sports, as related to increasing diversity efforts in a lawful fashion, to bring that over to our clients.
Awesome. And then just a follow up, as a diverse student myself, and you looking back on your law school career, what type of advice would you give myself in doing that proverbial reaching back and helping out to future diverse law students?
So for someone in your position who's a current law student and is coming in, particularly on the social media age where a lot of connected, I would just say, always be conscious of your brand. You actually have a personal brand, whether you realize it or not. And your personal brand could be people you know. It could be what you're reading. It could be, the associations you volunteer with. It could be a lot of those different things. People don't realize that those things are not necessarily connected with the job or part of your brand, right? Because that's going to have exposure about who you're meeting. That's going to have exposure about how people look at you. That's going to have exposure about how your interests are. And I think also, one of the things I've actually been very privileged with my career is, you mentioned I work with college presidents, and I actually have represented a number of women who've gone to leadership in higher education. I'm very proud of that. Is again to make sure that you're level setting in the room. That it's not the old, there was this saying back in the day, like, if you had a person who was a Black person in the room and they were so articulate and you speak so well, that's an expectation, right? That's an expectation. We have very bright people in law schools, and I think we're past that now. That we want to make sure that we're acknowledged and that you actually are exceeding that expectation based on what you got for yourself, right? And then we're actually exposing when there's rooms that there have not been a lot of people who look like you in them, that you're, like, stake your place and be comfortable in them. Stake your place and be comfortable in them. Be your authentic self. One of the things I'm familiar with saying early in my career, if I wasn't myself, you would have found out by now. So you would have known who I was, whether it's, my Eagles fandom that you see on my shoulder, or whether it's my, just corny jokes, what have you. But you would have a very genuine nature of who Ty is. Like, you wouldn't have any question about that, and that's fine. People want to know who's representing them. People want to know, especially when you're doing long hours, what the personality type is, and that's nothing that we should be ashamed of. And it really adds to the room.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with that. Thank you. So shifting to the wonderful wave of attention that HBCU football has been getting most recently, initiated by investments from former players like Doug Williams, Michael Strahan, Primetime, Deion Sanders. How do you feel attorneys working in the sports law industry can harness the energy and the attention that HBCU football is getting right now for these universities to capitalize on their sports programs like bigger PWI universities can?
So when we're talking about, elevating the profile of HBCUs, particularly as we think about the NEAC, the SWAC, the athletic conferences, and as you mentioned, in college athletics, it's a group effort. I mean, there's going to be things on the athletic side of the conferences and the administration, but from the attorney side, I do think history is an important lesson. HBCUs didn't just become a factor when it comes to college sports. If you look at the Steve McNairs, the Jerry Rices, the others that have had a connection with HBCUs in the past, where the NFL, there's a true NFL and NBA talent pipeline in those areas, but there's always been a question of resources. So now that you have this area, and yes, I know there's a lot more attention because you have Deion Sanders, Doug Williams when he was the coach at Grambling, but I think there's a recognition that has to go beyond just the legal industry, that from a business aspect, part of being a lawyer is helping our clients understand, business factors involved. There's a lot of money to be made here. Like, we have a lot of very affluent alums who are very, big supporters of sports on those campus. We went to school in Tulane. The Bayou Classic is a driver of revenue.
Right.
So, I can imagine what Thanksgiving weekend in New Orleans would be without the Bayou Classic. But there's other events just like that, the homecoming days of different schools, and with Steph Curry now and his involvement with the golf program with Howard, I think that that's the tip of the iceberg. And now there's the charisma factor you have, where it's kind of cool. You have that a high ranking recruit that's now, from last year, that, from Florida went to HBCU. So I think as lawyers, we have to help work through the whole maze. Like, maybe the information chain is not as great because some of the HBCUs are kind of new in the game, so to speak, in that. So the compliance issues, the opportunities, how to, help, the student athletes with their own engagement in that area, the pitfalls that people go through with social media and helping avoid that. And that deals with, goes beyond the standard compliance issues that everybody dealt with previously. And then for those companies that are trying to actually now, become aware of that, for those of us, because part of college athletics and the business of college athletics, so to speak, is those entities that are trying to do business with those entities, right? How do we help, those entities when they say, hey, I want to go do work with HBCU, and everybody, there's some big names, obviously the Howard Hamptons, Morale Spelman, we know those, but I want to go to an Alcorn State, I want to go to a Fisk, I want to go to Tuskegee. How do I find out how to network with those schools and broaden the, kind of broaden the base, so to speak, so that everybody knows that those opportunities are there, there's talented athletes there, but also from a brand perspective, it's going to be helpful for their brand.
As a 2001 graduate of Tulane Law, I know that the opportunities that myself and my classmates have now are different than the ones that you had when you were here. So my question to you is, where would you like to see this program go into the future? Knowing how much it's progressed over time, where would you like to see this program driven to in the future?
I think that's an interesting question, because part of the aspect when you're doing sports law is that, the topic of sports law is not a single discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have it be evolving.
Mm-hmm.
For example, esports was not part of anyone's equation 15 years ago, right? Or like that would have been limited. And some of the things that happen now where you have things driven down, not even at the college level, at the conference level, and how that's being affected. You think about media contracts and how that's done. There used to be network deals. How's it with, you have streaming, devices and streaming, applications that are now being more involved, social media, and how that's been affected, not just in behavior and conduct issues and how it's regulated, speech issues, how does that affect labor issues, but kind of always have that interwoven aspect of, and I think we do a good job of this as a law school, by the way. So I'll give Gabe a shout out for that. I do think that we do a good job of making sure that we're staying abreast of those issues, and that, we're, as they develop, we're expanding our curriculum to talk about those things. Because when you come out of law school, it's not going to be, respectfully, even though one of my most interesting cases, maybe just as me, was the Tarkanian Supreme Court case that went before with the NCAA, that actually went to the Supreme Court back in '88, if I remember correctly. I just thought that was the due process case that everybody learns about the NCAA not being a state actor. As much as that's of interest to me, just personally, because people sometimes misunderstand, who has what status in professional sports or in college athletics. I think it's also important that we actually, we're not just historians. We have to make sure that we understand that, just because, something, and there's certain cases that are always going to be important, but there's certain things that we have to make sure the evolving nature of, with the legal landscape is changing. And you're seeing that right now, obviously, with Alston, and, how that, is, going to be interpreted. You're seeing that with the name, image, and likeness laws in different states and how that's being interpreted. It's going to be interesting to see how that happens, certainly with the international golf regime that's now, being involved with the PGA. Mm-hmm. So every year, that's the interesting thing. Like, and this is a great thing for lawyers, right? Is there something that's new being built on that we have to stay abreast of? So that's the cool thing. But I will hope that we're always,
that's completely true.
That information,
and like you said,
from
everything from live golf to NIL, there's always going to be a hot topic in sports law. So I agree with that. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I appreciate your time for this interview. I know you're a busy man. I appreciate you sitting down with us and doing this spotlight for the sports law program here. We really do appreciate you and your service to this community in Tulane. So my last question, I promise, is the tie Tulane green or is it Eagles green?
Well, see, somebody's going to see this and ask me if it's Dartmouth green too. So I'm going to say yes. The answer is yes.
All right, fair. So you went with the colorway. Okay, so you're an Eagles fan for the colorway, not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I've had green in all my college athletics experience, so I'm just going to stick with that and not have any questions.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for meeting with me today, Ty. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.